But it is hard to know how to respond at the time of offering, which we actually don't. If we actually have a fault at our church, it's that we talk about the giving time and service too little. Sometimes I go months without even bringing it up. But it is hard to know what to think and how to respond when we start talking about giving at church. And there's a lot of different ways we can respond. And today we are finishing our series called Immeasurably More on giving. And we can all take a giant sigh of relief after this Sunday. But here's what I want to say as we close our time today. I want to make a case to you that what God calls us to is actually better. I want to draw up something where we can look at what God's mindset is and what our world's mindset is, and then you can choose for yourself. Because what God has in store for you and what He has in store for me is immeasurably more than anything you or I could ask for or imagine. Now, if you've been here for a little while, I've quoted this exact quote about 2 or 3 times since I've been the preacher of this church. But John Golden has a book called Biblical Theology where he makes this quote that just blew my mind, and I want to share with people as often as I can get it. He says this: the Old Testament, think about the Old Testament, what your mindset is when you hear Old Testament, God's a mean God, He didn't love people back then, blah, 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 blah. The Old Testament is particularly interested in the good life, which is epitomized by the enjoyment of being able to sit under one's own vine and fig tree and invite people there with you. Now, one of the things we try to remind ourselves of often at this church is that God's not a tyrant, He's a friend. That what He has in store for us is actually a good thing. And here's the deal. Here's my hope and prayer, is that as you get to the time of your season of life where you say, this has been my time at Winston-Salem, I'm now moving on, this is my time at Foothills Christian Church is over because I'm moving to a new place and God's got me going somewhere else. Here's what I hope for. I hope one of the things you can say about me as your pastor is you'll say, you know what, Garrett was the most encouraging and uplifting pastor I've ever had when it comes to my job. I hope you know how much credit I give you for doing your job well. I hope you know how much I am impressed by you for going out into this work week every single week and giving it your all because our community needs it. I want to be a huge encouragement for that. But what I often want to remind us of is that what God is actually calling us to is the good life. And here's what he goes on to say. He says this: there's hardly a word so characteristic of the Old Testament as the word joy. It is astonishing how many references in the Old Testament and the New Testament are delight, joy, bliss, exultation, merrymaking, and rejoicing, and how emphatically they are demanded upon us by the book of Psalms all the way to the book of Philippians in the New Testament. It is constantly saying, this is what I want for you. God's going, if you stick with me, if you stick with me, if you stick with me, you can get your own fig tree. You can get your own setup. You can have a good land. Remember what the promise was in the Old Testament? God's saying, hey, listen, I want you to go break my people out of slavery in Egypt so they can go into their promised land. What was the promised land? A land flowing with milk and honey. The good life. He wanted to show people how to live in a good land as good people in the good life. And what's fascinating about this is that very often that comes with requirements. Requirements that say you live into this way of life and you will receive the good life. Moses was the guy. In the Old Testament, I know our minds always go to people like Abraham or King David or whatever. There's the prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah. Moses was the guy. If you want to point back to a single character that was like, this is the man at the top of the mountain, it was Moses. More than Abraham, more than David, Moses was the guy. And on his last speech that he gave the people of Israel, he was reminding them of everything they'd learned over the last 40 years. This speech is in your Bibles. It's called Deuteronomy. And he's giving this speech, and he's teaching them, he's reminding them of what God has told them. He's reminding them the 10 Commandments. He's reminding them all these things. And then he says this in chapter 30. He says this day I call heaven and earth, I call it to witness against you and me, that this is what I've done. I have set before you life and death. I have set before you blessings and curses. And this is what he says. He's going, look, I'm not going to be your guy much longer. I'm about to go die. I'm about to go the way of all our ancestors. But this is what I want to say to you. Choose life. Choose life so that you and your children may live. Our series title, Immeasurably More, comes from the book of Ephesians, where Paul says this, now to him who's able to do immeasurably more than all we ask for or imagine. Some of you are really good at asking for the things you want. You make the rest of us uncomfortable, by the way. You are very upfront. We know exactly what you want, all right? I married one of you. You make us all uncomfortable, okay? Others of you are scared to death to tell anybody what you want. You just can't say it out loud, but your imagination runs wild. And there's all sorts of things you'd like. There's all sorts of things you'd want. And Paul's going, hey, what God has in store for you is immeasurably more than anything you'd be so bold to ask for or have the imagination to think of. He's bringing you into the good life. So here's the question. How do we choose the good life? How do we do it? A couple weeks ago, we started off by quoting one of the most misquoted verses in the Bible. Does anybody remember what that was? For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, right? How do we normally quote that verse? We take about 80% of it out and we say, money is evil. That's what we say, all right? That's how we have condensed it down and changed the meaning of it entirely. But today I want us to look at a verse that most of us hear and we assume it's being misquoted. We assume it's being taken out of context. We assume that the Bible actually does not really think that way. You ready to see the verse? Here it is. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. Test me in this and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will not be enough room to store it. You feel it, right? Oh, it's this verse again. You can feel it, right? You're going, wait. You're about to show us how that's like pulled out of context, right, Garrett? No, I'm not going to read the context actually because it's so brutal. You'll just tune me out. So let's just listen to it. Test me. One of the great sins of the Bible, by the way, is testing God. But here's a moment where God actually comes out, hey, I'll give you a free pass. Test me. Test me and see if you don't bring in your gifts to me, I will not outgive you and then some. You hear this verse and you go, you can't possibly, you think you can't even read this verse out loud unless you're like going to be preaching on television and have a weird looking suit and you're like, just touch the screen, we got some handkerchiefs or whatever. Like that's what you think of. You think this verse would be quoted in church. But this is a real life verse in our real life Bibles. And it's not an uncommon idea. Here, let me just read a couple more. Bradley, you can leave that up there, it's fine. Or take it down. It says this, this will bring wealth to your body, and this is Proverbs, and nourishment to your soul, your bones. Honor the Lord with your wealth and the first fruits of your crops. One person gives freely, and yet gains even more. And another person withholds unduly and comes to poverty. A generous person will prosper. Here's Luke. This is Jesus talking. Give and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, and it will pour it into your lap. For with the measure you use it will be measured to you. This idea comes up over and over. The Apostle Paul says, remember this, whoever sows sparingly reaps sparingly. Whoever sows generously reaps generously. So decide in your heart what you will give. This is not just an idea about money. It's an idea about how to live inside the economy of God. It's how to live inside the economy of God. The economy of God says this. When you are generous, you receive things back. When you give, you receive blessing. It's this way the Bible talks, and it's fascinating. And it's hard to wrap our heads around. But it's what God says. What happened? And what he says is, test me in it and see if I don't give you the blessings to live your life with. And it's a hard teaching, but listen to what Malachi 3:12 says. It says this, then all nations will call you blessed, for yours will be a delightful land. Living the good life. Now here's what's fascinating. Have you heard any verses that sound like that, by the way? And every Christmas we read Mary's song, my soul magnifies the Lord. All peoples on earth will call me blessed. Here's one of those rules of following Jesus, that when we step into the hard call that he gives our life, blessings follow. Blessings follow. And people turn around and say, man, that's the good life. Now here's two principles, and then two principles about this that I want us to look at. One is the idea of the tithe. It says bring the whole tithe in, and the other is first fruits. Okay, these two ideas when it comes to finances. And the tithe is literally just a word that means 10%, which is a big chunk of change, right? Like that's a lot of my income, right? And the principle is this: Christians learn to live on less than we make. The Bible says that God is a consuming fire. We're not consuming fires. We don't run around and lap up every last little resource that we have. No, we learn to live in less than we bring in. A rule that you'll hear in churches all over the place is the 10-10-80 rule. You give 10, you're generous with 10, you save 10, you live off of 80. And you learn to live on less than you make so you don't get stranded one day going, what am I going to do next? How am I going to get out of this? How'd this happen? And you have the ability to survive these sort of waves that come into your life, because they always will, right? Who's been married more than 5 years? Financial things happen, right? We all know this. And so the idea is that we don't just consume every last dime of our money and spend it on us. We learn to live on less than we make. And the other one is this word, first fruits. And the idea is that the first thing you do. Now, I understand there's small business people and there's different ways where people make money different ways, and you don't always know exactly what you have. So you kind of, sometimes people give differently. But the idea of first fruits is this, that you have a plan. That you make a plan to be generous. And so what we talked about last week, and this is important, what God's calling us to is to start operating in our lives like managers and operators with our finances. He says, I want you to operate in your finances like a person with authority. You wanted to go pay your power bill, you send that money to pay your power bill. You want to be generous, you send that money to be generous. You want to pay that for the restaurant, you send it to be. What you say, it does. Don't ask your money to control you, because it will. But God says, I want you to have a plan where you come to figure out how you want to operate in your finances. And I think that's a pretty cool thing to hear from God. That God's going, I want you to operate like a person with authority. Because if we do not exert some authority over our finances will exert authority over us. Now, I want us all to take a deep breath and breathe it out. We're all a little tense in the room. All that was a rundown on the Christian view of finances. Are you ready to hear the world's view of finances? Because I want you to remember something. This world puts requirements on us just like God puts requirements on us. Here's a perfect example of how the world puts requirements on us. Black Friday. What is Black Friday? It's the official start of Christmas shopping. And every time, even if Thanksgiving is really late like it was last year, they go, here it is. In the 3, 4, 5, 5 years running up to Black Friday, they're going, this is something you have to have. And for months going into there, you get catalogs after. Does anybody get catalogs still? You get Facebook ads. You get commercials. Does anybody watch TV still? You get YouTube ads. You get all, right? They start texting your phone. You have to have this thing. You can't have your kid be the only one in the room that doesn't have this thing. Your kid's going to kindergarten. You got to give him a smartphone. And you can't have a 2-year-old without his own TikTok account. Come on, you have to have it. You have to have it. And you get to Black Friday and you go, I'll buy it all. Everything I can get. I'll take every little last bit of it. It doesn't matter if it makes us actively less happy. I will buy it because the world says, I have to have it. We've all been there. And then what happens next? Cyber Monday. Oh yeah, you forgot. There's 1,000 other things you need. You didn't buy it. You couldn't get it at the Walmart because they were kicking down the door and burning it and everything like that. So now you got to come to Cyber Monday. Buy online. We'll just deliver it to your house. And you go after that. And then what happens after that? Giving Tuesday. If you have any left over. I know you just spent 4 months worth of income on the last 2 days, but if you just had any spare, it's just, if you could be generous now that you have literally nothing, you've over-leveraged yourself and have nothing to give. You know those guys with the bells and the little red bucket? The hole is this big. That's how much money we have left to give to charity. It's like if you have even a dime to kind of shove in this bucket, that'd be great. And you're going, I haven't seen a dime in 5 years. You know what I mean? And my credit card's spent. I don't have it. And what's it saying? What's the world saying? Here's how you be generous. You give out of the leftovers. And what does the economy of God say? You give out of planning. You give out of a decision that I will rule my finances and they will not rule me. And here's the deal. If we wait around and wait for a sappy enough story, you may give to that sappy story, but if you give out of a plan, you will end up being way more generous over the long run. And so here it is. There's the economy of God and the economy of this world. And that's how they operate. Completely reversed from each other. Now, last couple of minutes, I want to tell you why I think God's way is better. Because the economy of heaven, the economy of God, is the real economy. It's actually how this world works. Because you know why? It was created by God. It's actually how the world works. Here are 2 stories I found this month, and I thought they blew me away. There's a lady who studied popular kids. And she asked the question, what makes somebody popular? And now you and I think maybe it's because you shove enough kids in lockers, you end up being the popular kid, or you bully enough kids, or whatever. And they go, no, actually, here's what we learned about popular kids. We followed them around high school. We just wanted to see what they do. And she realized that the popular kids, the kids that have more people liking them, those kids like more people. So they'd walk through school and they go, hey, Joe, how are you doing? Hey, Susie, cool jacket, blah, blah, coach, good to see you. And everywhere they went, they had people they were making relational investments in all through the hallway. Every day, all day, they were making relational investments here, relational investments there, relational investments there. And guess what they came to find out? The people who did that, the more people you kind of gave yourself relationally to, guess what they had? More people giving back to them relationally. And they were popular, right? Okay, you were all thinking it, right? That movie's wrong, all right? It wasn't written by God. But what's it showing? What's it showing? It's showing that God's economy is the real economy. That when God says, when you give, you receive. When you are generous, it comes back. When you love, people love back. That the economy of heaven is the real economy. Okay, but what about dollars and cents, Gary? Here's another one. I don't even like talking about this because I don't have any advice on how to become a rich person. I want to give this disclaimer. That's not what I'm here to do. I'm not here to make rich people. But there's this guy who's an economist named Arthur Brooks, and he's gone on this kick the last 4 or 5 years to make the world happy. He wants to teach people how to be happy. And he starts studying happiness. He starts studying how people who are happy and how do they stay happy and how they get happy and all that sort of stuff. And here's something he discovered as he started pouring into the lives of these people. He started coming up to this conclusion. He started going, I kept finding that the more people gave away, the richer they became. He goes, I'm an economist. That's not right. That's not how the economy works. And so he goes to his friends at Harvard who are psychologists and sociologists, and he goes, hey, I keep finding this. What's happening? And they all look at him and they go, duh. We've known that for 30 years. Which, by the way, if they've known that for 30 years, they're not telling the rest of us, come on, guys. You know what I mean? PhDs. Anyways, they're going, yeah, we found that out a long time ago. That this weird thing happens that when people are generous with their money, they end up making more money in the future. It's a fascinating thing, and I don't have any promises about it for you. I don't know, but here's what it's saying. It's saying, you know, the way God says this world works actually is kind of working out that way. And the economy of God is the real economy. And here's the thing. Here's my last reason why I want you to believe that this is the right way. That Christians who give swear by it. There are people out there every single month, every year, their whole life of earning money, they've given a tithe, a real live 10% tithe. And if you can't do that, I know we are living in America. We've been taught from a very young age to live with no margin in your life. I know that. And so if you can start, maybe you can't start with 10% or whatever, but I'm telling you, the people who give 10%, they swear by it. They will tell you, 90% of my money plus the blessing of God is immeasurably more than 100% of my money and no blessing from God. They will swear by it. And there are people in this room, and there are people in this room's parents and their parents that have this tradition of giving that has just been passed down to them, and yet they'll just ask them. I sat down with Steve, and I said that one line. They swear by it. He just laughed, and he said, "Yeah, my mom, he just talked about how she every month sent off the check to the church. Going to do it. I'm going to do it." And he's like, they swear by it. I remember as a kid sitting in my kitchen that I owned and bought because I was a kid, and my dad walked in, and he started reading the giving statement that he received from our church. And he said, "This is the amount of money we gave to this, and this is what we gave to missions, and this is what we blah, blah, blah." And it was just a report back of what they'd given. And the numbers he was reading to my 8-year-old brain sounded astronomical. They sounded huge. And I go, if we kept that stuff, I could have bought a Rumble pack for my N64 controller. You know what I mean? Kids these days, they don't know that controllers don't just vibrate up magically. You know what I mean? You used to have to buy this, repurposed Tommy gun container to kind of put on the bottom of your N64. You couldn't lift it, like it weighed 9 pounds, but at least it rumbled, you know what I mean? I didn't have one. My dad gave it to the dumb church, Like kids, the original PlayStation, kids, listen to me. The original PlayStation didn't even come with memory on the machine. You had to buy a memory card. And I didn't have one because my dad didn't buy it for me. So I'd start a new football season every Saturday, play the same 3 games, and have to start over next week. That's the hardship. That's back in black and white movies and everything. And I'm sitting there going, man, what could we have done if my dad didn't give all this money away? And I heard it and I go, Dad, if we didn't give that away, we'd be rich. And he goes, nope, we'd be broke. We'd be struggling to make ends meet. And that line has stayed with me my entire life. And if I could put my dad right here on stage and I said, hey, would you suggest anyone on earth start tithing or start giving to the church? He would say it will be one of the best decisions you ever make. It's a weird thing. Our minds don't work that way. But the people who step in and say, all right, God, I'll take you at your word, they swear by it. And here's what's cool, man. We're at a time where we don't need to beg for money. I told you this week 1. If this is something that's always been like, I don't know how to handle this, dude, I hope you do take this series as a chance just to hear what the Bible has to say about giving. Just like I hope you come every Sunday to hear what does the Bible actually say about this or that, and then you can think through it yourself. But as we live this life with Jesus, man, we have to find these different areas of our life where we're hesitant, where we're scared, where we're nervous. We have to say, God, I'm about to break through. I'm going to break through this. Because here's what's cool. I've said it 1,000 times. It doesn't make anyone else in the room as happy as it makes me. We just had a year where we are in the black for the first time ever. And that is because of your giving. That is because of the elders and the finance team trying to be as wise and faithful as possible with the giving that comes into this building. And that is cool because that means we're not in trouble. But God says, Jesus says, I will build my church. And the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. And when God decided to build Foothills Christian Church, He did not build it. Listen to me. He did not build it so that it could be in the black. He built it so it could be a force for good, a force for the gospel in the Foothills area, in the Louisville, Winston-Salem, Clemens area. And there are people in this area that need Jesus Christ. And as we as a church step into God's mission and God's call in our life, who knows where He'll take us 10, 20 years down the road? Because God has big plans. If you hated this series, you're going to love next series. This next series is all about our theme for the year of finding our place in God's story. But listen to me. God has big plans. He has big plans for you and for me and this church. And I'm hoping that we will find a way to pile all those together and be a church on mission together. One of the things that is one of the great miracles about our church is this building. We were sold this building for half of what it could have been bought for. And the only way we could have ever afforded this church building is that they gave it to us so low. It was wonderful. But do you know what this building is? It was the building of a church called Trinity Friends Church. They have a little thing out there. It's a little placard. And I don't know anything about that. Actually, I gave one person who was part of that church a walk through the building. He was like, I love what you did with the place. I go, thank you. I did it all. I don't know anything about that church. But you know, I know one thing about that church. And that's what this building represents. I know that church rallied together and said, you know what, we're going to make this church happen. And we're going to make this church happen in this part of the town, this part of the city, so that there can be people come here and find Jesus. We're going to rally together. We're going to make it happen. And you know what they did? They came together and they did the hard work and they bought this building. They built it. They built the fellowship hall. They bought the land and they said, we're going to make it happen. We know that church did it one time. That's all the evidence we've got. Sadly, that church is not a thing anymore. It's not on our North Carolina books anymore. But what we need for our church to be is a church that says we're going to rally together, we're going to be all in, we're going to be going for the gospel, and we need to do it year after year after year. And I hope that you will join us. I hope that you'll trust us and you'll come along for the ride. Because I have loved being your pastor, I have loved 2024, and I'm excited about 2025, and I hope you are too. I'm going to pray, the band's going to sing, and I'm going to eat some bacon. I haven't had any bacon yet. The band can go and come up. I want to just say this real quick before I pray. If you get into a point in a sermon, you come to church, and you feel yourself getting all tense like this because of the topic they're talking about. And it's just, you're like this every time that topic comes up. It doesn't have to be money, it could be anything. That could be a sign that there's something that you've not given over to God yet. That could be a sign that God's trying to test you. He's trying to poke into your life. Say, hey, I want you to trust me on this. And my encouragement for you and my prayer for our church is that we'll be a church that trusts God in what He says.